Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields Bourbon Podcast, where we sit and sip, talk all things Civil War history and bourbon. I'm Jack, joined here as always with my co-host Elijah, and we are coming to you from the historic Bell House in beautiful downtown Winchester, preserved by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation. Today, we're going to be sipping on a special bourbon that Elijah's going to go into a little bit more detail about now.
Sure. So we've got Four Roses single barrel strength. This one is from the Distillery gift shop. I actually grabbed this one a couple weeks ago down there for my brother's bachelor trip. So this one is hand selected by their master distiller, Brent Elliott. So I trust that his palate is experienced enough to pick a good one for us tonight. But this one is the OESO recipe. So Four Roses has 10 different recipes, and they are made from 2 mash bills, 5 different yeast strains, so double that and it gets you your 10 recipes. This one in particular is 75% corn, 20% rye, and 5% malted barley. So they say on the notes that it's supposed to taste like rich fruit, honey, cherry, a little bit of, the good stuff. And this one was bottled May of 2023 at 113.6 proof. And then just to note, as I said in the name of the bourbon itself, it's a single barrel, so it comes from one barrel, handpicked by the man himself at Four Roses, and it is barrel strength. So without further ado, we can pop this one. I don't know if it'll be a good one because the last one I had wasn't a good pop.
That's a good pop.
That was a good pop.
Yeah.
It was a good pop. We'd love to hear that. Alrighty. And Phil, pour what you want.
Yeah. We'll introduce Phil here in a second, but you'll hear his commentary on the bourbon in the meantime.
The official pour.
And I will say,
You can smell that from here.
Four Roses itself, when I first heard about it, the name doesn't sound like it's a manly bourbon you're going to drink.
Thinking it should be in a brown bag.
Exactly.
When you come out of the carryout.
Right.
Oh, yeah. All right, give it a sniff.
I mean, you can just smell that like it permeates the room.
Yeah. What's the proof on it?
113.6.
Okay.
So
Higher.
pretty much 114.
Well, guys, to the pure life.
To the pure
Yes, sir.
life.
To the pure life.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, it's
That's
got
impressive.
a little after, but it's
The Kentucky
I get that.
hug.
Yeah, that like dark, almost chocolatey, darker fruit, something like that. I don't want to copy what it told me, but, but yeah, you get that, darkness at the end.
My brother's got a bottle, and he likened it to Queen Anne's chocolate-covered cherries. And now I can't get that out of my head. But go ahead, Phil.
This is, this whole bourbon phenomena is interesting from a guy who grew up on doing whiskey shots.
Now you're sitting here sipping
exactly
it.
how you're sipping it. It's still it's good.
Young Phil would be like, "What the hell's going on
I was
here?"
going to say, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is
That's impressive. Yeah, that's...
the bottle too with the Four Roses and the glass, and it's
Oh, yeah, it's a beautifully done bottle. All their bottles and labels are perfect.
Yeah.
Elijah, what you said earlier about when you see the name of it, you go, well, do I really want something to buy? Yeah, Yeah.
But you hear about it and you hear good things about it.
Yeah.
I went in doubting because it's like who names their, like if I'm going to start or make a bourbon, I'm going to name it like something manly, like
Right.
hardwood or something weird.
And the name or the history of this name comes from the guy that founded Four Roses back in 1888.
Wow.
Had asked this woman either, I don't know if it was to marry him or to be his girlfriend, whatever the case was, something like that. And she said that if she were to show up to this ball wearing 4 red roses, that it was a yes. And sure enough, she shows up wearing 4 red roses on her dress, and that's what he named the brand after in terms of like commemorating her. So that's where the whole...
It's a cool story.
Yeah, it is. It's got a lot of history to it.
What kind of price point?
Yeah.
For this one, I got this one at the distillery for I think it was $105 after tax. In Virginia, I think they go for $90. It just depends on the state. Sometimes you'll see them marked up really, really high if the recipe's a good one, because like I said, they've got 10 different recipes. Some are more sought after than others in terms of I guess, the flavor profile.
It's not bad at all.
What about your basic Four Roses?
So your basic Four Roses, I mean, they do like just their regular stuff. It's like a $20 bottle, 80 proof, more like a mixer than anything. But then there are other stuff like the small batch, single barrel, small batch select. Those are all, I think the most expensive one's like $60. They all taste amazing. They all do really, really well by themselves. But then in a mixed drink, if you like a good old fashioned, they all do really, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do like a good old fashioned.
I wouldn't do it with this one.
No.
I feel like that would be a sin.
Yeah,
but this one,
no, I do like a good old fashioned.
I think I've only had like one in my whole life, so it's. But I hear great things about old fashioned.
I'll make you a good one. Don't worry.
Yeah, it is. You get a good one. That's a good drink, right?
Yeah. No, I got hooked on it. And, people will roll their eyes at this, but the way I got into it was with mint juleps. That was my first introduction to
That's
using
though.
bourbon.
Yeah,
oh my God, I could drink mint juleps. Yeah, after work, a mint julep. I mean, it's the best, and especially during the summer, it's like the best thing ever. Yeah.
When my son brought his fiancée to meet us the first time, his girlfriend, she knew that I liked good bourbon.
Yeah.
So she bought in a bottle of, I think it might have just been like Gentleman Jack or something. And then she bought in a bottle of like Diet Dr. Pepper to mix it with. And we had to sit down. I had to explain that we weren't going to mix, even though Gentleman Jack may not be the high. We're not going to mix that with anything.
That's the talk you're having with your daughter-in-law.
Right. Her first time, she hadn't even made it through the kitchen, and I said, "We need to have some.
We need to have a talk. Sit down."
Yeah, I love the fact you drink bourbon, but we're not going to be mixing it with Dr. Pepper.
Phil, that's great.
Hey, at least it was well put.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it was. You were nice about it.
Set the ground rules early and often.
Well, awesome. Well, if folks, if you enjoy stories like how Four Roses was started and the name got, you can also enjoy historical stories on History Fix. The streaming platform, explore movies, short films, and documentaries. Battlefields and Bourbon's fans can receive an extra 20% off the first year's annual subscription of History Fix. You can sign up at www.historyfix.com and use promo code BATTLEFIELD. That's promo code BATTLEFIELD. Every subscription includes a 7-day risk-free trial, so you can escape into history with History Fix today. And myself, being a History Fix subscriber, can testify to that. It's a great platform to have on your smart TV or however you watch your streaming platforms, to be able to go on there and watch a unique variety of history films and series and shows and videos. It's super handy to have that, so I recommend it to everybody. But yeah, that's code Battlefield at checkout, and you get 20% off your first year's annual subscription. So thank you, folks at History Fix. Yep. Elijah, back to you.
You caught me at the wrong time.
I know, taking a sip.
Oh, man. Alrighty, so without further ado, we've got to introduce our guest for the evening, Mr. Phil Spaugy. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you think?
I like puppy dogs. No, exactly. No, what do I think? How did I get into this?
With
you guys?
How are you here at the table,
How
Phil?
am I here at the table? It started a long time ago. No, I started. I've always had an interest in the Civil War. I was 7 years old in 1961.
Don't do the math.
There's 7. No, I won't. Wait till next year when I'm 70. Anyhow, and there's several of us guys, battlefield trompers, good friends, that we consider ourselves boys of 61. That's 1961.
Yeah.
At that age, my grandmother, who had been a one-room school teacher, avid reader, history nut, she was a farm wife in Shelby County, Ohio, made sure I had plenty of books and read, to the point that she really got me interested. Of course, now it's the centennial, and you've got Johnny Reb cannons, you've got uniforms, for kids, you got soldiers to play with. My favorite story, we didn't take many vacations as a family, but on one of them we went to Lookout Mountain, and I didn't want to see Rock City or Ruby Falls. everybody else in the car. My siblings did, but we ended up going past Chickamauga Battlefield, and I was about 10 or 11. I wanted to stop, and we were camping at a campground nearby, and so the next day, Mom packed me a lunch, and Dad took me to the battlefield. We went into the ranger station, and they said, "Hey, this kid's going to be here all day. We got him packed a lunch. Will you keep an eye on him for us?" Now, can you imagine?
Those were the times, though. Yeah.
This is probably 1964.
Yeah.
And they said, "Sure, not a problem. We'll keep an eye on him." And I rode. I had my bag lunch, and I walked the battlefield of Chickamauga. And,
by yourself or with a ranger? Oh my gosh!
Just hanging out. I mean, so it's always been a baseline interest of mine when people say, when you get started. And then even through school, after I graduated from high school, the librarian called me and asked me if I would return most of their Civil War books to the school library. I said, yeah, I would. So, 1978 comes along. I was always interested in shooting black powder and Civil War guns, and so I had bought a reproduction Civil War rifle musket, go to a local range to meet a guy by the name of John Roby, who was sighting in a musket there. He had a old Hardy hat on. He came down, and, I'm not even hitting the backstop, and he said, I'm a member of the NSSA. Would you like to shoot with us? And we have a shoot about 30 miles away that next weekend. And I said, sure. So I went out. They were the 19th Indiana, and I joined right away. Now, that was right before I got married in my first administration, and she didn't have much of an appreciation of the Civil War or shooting, but it was happening all at the same time. Fast forward a lot of years later, John ended up being my father-in-law.
Wow.
And he's still on the team. He was a national commander also. And he really helped get me started in the Iron Brigade, 19th Indiana, and the real history journey, because the NSSA, North-South Skirmish Association, is full of some of the best Civil War historians,
no doubt,
that you will ever know. And it's really a cool dynamic there, because knowing some of these people opened a lot of doors for me. So I started shooting in 78, and I've shot every year since, and have been a national commander and held a lot of different offices, and still doing it. Still competitive rifle shot. So
do you have a favorite gun to shoot?
I have shot an original Mississippi rifle with a competition barrel by a guy by the name of Bill Large, and black powder shooters will know Bill Large basically since 1984 or 5. And the rifle the barrel has been refreshed out, had some work on it. It has been shot on our team through 4 national championships and 1 musket championship by myself individually. When I started to shoot it and doing real well with it, it was during the time that the movie The Natural came out. So I named it Wonder Boy. Put a piece of tape in the patch box with a lightning bolt on it.
Oh, that's awesome.
So,
and do you still shoot with the 19th?
Yep.
Wow.
Actually, just a quick segue. Then in 1983, the 19th, we split off from the 19th, and we became Company A of the 19th Indiana, which was the Union Guards, which the NSSA will let that happen. You just can't have 2 regiments or units named exactly the same. So, yes, it's the same. It's still the 19th. It's just the name is a little different.
Okay, Company A.
Company A.
There you go.
Company A.
Well, speaking of the 19th, that's exactly what our topic is today, the 19th Indiana at Gettysburg, specifically the color guard, correct?
Yeah, exactly. This is a presentation I have done a fair amount. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And at the end, we can talk about one of the neat things is I was able to get Don Trione it's been about 10 years ago, to do a print called The Black Hats.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a print of part of the story of the color guard at Gettysburg.
Wow.
And I think it's a neat thing to talk about is working the process with a guy like Don Troiani to bring this episode to life, which he did for us. And
because I'm sure we've all, at times been on battlefields or things, and you're always imagining, I'm sure, what happened here, trying to bring it to life in your head. But for myself, and then for what I do for work, I've had a couple opportunities to work with some artists and bring some scenes to life for fundraising opportunities. And there's so many scenes of the war that I want to see brought to life. So that's almost cool that you've got to bring a picture that you've imagined in your head to life.
It was a signature moment, and again, we'll talk about it at the end. It's kind of a good closing, after we get done talking about the color guard a little bit, to talk about how, and that's how I do the PowerPoint is at the end, and but wait, there's more, because let's talk about how this happened, and I was very lucky that it happened. So,
well, without further ado, I guess however you want to segue us into it, Phil, take it away.
Well, we start with the 19th. It was one of the original regiments of the Iron Brigade. You had the 19th Indiana, the 2nd Wisconsin, 6th Wisconsin, and the 7th Wisconsin. After Antietam, and we'll kind of go fast forward a little quick, the 24th Michigan would join the brigade. Originally, the original Brigadier General was Rufus King, followed by May 5th, 1862, was John Gibbon. And anybody familiar with the Army of Potomac or the Iron Brigade would know John Gibbon is probably, the consummate, called by one of Grant's staff officers, the consummate Civil War American soldier. Gibbon is an interesting study in himself. Born in Philadelphia, his family moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. He went to West Point, appointed from West Point from North Carolina. And he had 2 or 3 brothers that stayed in the Confederate service, and the family was splintered by the Civil War. They never reconciled at all. John had gone west. He was captain of Company B of the 4th U.S. Artillery at the start of the war, which would become known as the Iron Brigade Battery because they supported the Iron Brigade in a lot of actions. Brigadier General, he's of the Iron Brigade. He's the one that got him the dress uniform. Rufus King kind of started it, but he finished it out with the Hardee hat and the white,
which we all know today.
The white gaiters. The white gaiters were universally hated by the troops. In fact, the 19th Indiana, which was the nicknamed the Swamp Hogs, number 19, which was the sloppiest, undisciplined regiment of the Iron Brigade, but they were also known to be all hell in a fight. They actually put gaiters on Gibbon's horse because they didn't like them. If you've ever worn a lace-up gaiter, you will understand why they didn't like them. The gaiters were only issued once, May of 1862, to the whole brigade, and they pretty much disappeared by the Gettysburg campaign. So you fast forward with the history of the brigade. They were engaged at the Battle of Gainesville, also known as Browner's Farm. Actually, the name Browner's Farm came from Alan Nolan's book. That's what he called it. Mm-hmm. The veterans called it Gainesville. The Douglas family actually owned the farm at the time of the battle. My father-in-law, years ago, before it was part of the park, was walking on the farm, and an old farmer came out of the house. Said, "What are you doing out in this field?" He goes, "Well, I'm interested in the Civil War, 19th Indiana, interested in the Browners." And the guy said, basically, "Damn it, the Browners were tenants here. That was owned by the Douglas family. The Browners were nothing but tenant farmers." So heavily engaged there, tremendous losses. That's August of 1862.
Where were they on the battlefield there?
They were on the left flank.
Okay.
On August 28th. Okay. The Iron Brigade was marching down the Warrenton Pike. Mm-hmm. And, they see this, as Alan Nolan writes it, or Bruce Catton even writes it better. They see this solitary figure up on to the north side of the pike, up on the hills. They think it may be a cavalryman, And then all of a sudden, Gibbon sights the side of our batteries coming into action. And it's Confederate artillery, and the figure was Stonewall Jackson. And he had his division hidden, so they engaged the Iron Brigade there for a stand-up fight. Lasted probably 90 minutes or so. Terrific casualties, terrific musketry. The 19th was on the left flank near the Douglas farm.
Douglas.
Which is a great, I just saw a link the National Park Service, or Manassas did, released about the archaeology of the Browner farm. Mm-hmm. And about the bullets they found there near the house, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It really is, especially for relic hunters that like to hear that kind of stuff.
Special place in my heart.
Yeah, especially
for sure.
Exactly. So fast forward, that's August 28th. By the 15th of September, they're at South Mountain, where they got their name from supposedly Joe Hooker, who named them the Iron Brigade because of the way they pushed the Confederates off of Turner's Gap. And then they're through the cornfield on the first day at Antietam. Not heavily engaged at all during the Fredericksburg campaign. That's when the 24th Michigan would join them. Really not engaged during Chancellorsville much. So then we start the march to Gettysburg. And they start marching early June, end up, June 30th finds the 1st Corps as part of the wing commanded by John Reynolds, which was the 1st, 3rd, and 11th Corps, encamped around Marsh Creek, Emmitsburg. They really didn't have a feel they were going to go into action. The 19th, as they marched from Emmitsburg basically to Marsh Creek, which is only, say, 7 miles, easy day.
It's a northern.
Yeah, and if you go up Emmitsburg, it's still today, it's a beautiful place to camp. Mm-hmm. But the 19th, as they were going into camp, to say, you guys are going to be on picket duty. So they ended up another 3 or 4 miles north, and where they camped or had picket duty throughout their picket line was actually on Warfield Ridge on the Gettysburg battlefield. A lot of people don't know this. But Colonel Dudley would write that they were put out their picket line in the shadow of the big mountain, which obviously would be Big Round Top. William Roby Moore, who has written a real nice diary of the 19th in Gettysburg, writes about how upset they were that they had to keep marching while the other guys have stopped, are building their fires and making coffee, washing themselves off in Marsh Creek. But when they got into position, they were visited by the farm ladies of the area, like the Bushman Farm and the Slider Farm and the Sherfy Farm, names that would be really familiar in American history in the next 48 hours with food. So they said it really wasn't a bad place to be thrown out on picket duty.
Yeah.
So, the morning of July 1st comes. They really had no inclination that they were going to go into action. Colonel Charles Wainwright is the chief of artillery for the 1st Army Corps. And he writes in his diary, which is a fantastic read, it's been reprinted, you can get it, about having, he was so relaxed, and he had Doubleday, who by this time was in command of the 1st Corps because Reynolds was now in command of the left wing. He said, we don't expect to really have any action. So he stopped at a blacksmith shop and was having his horse reshod. So the Iron Brigade, the 1st Brigade, the 1st Division of the 1st Army Corps, that was the Iron Brigade. They always had this big pride thing. They were the second line of march. Cutler's Brigade was first. They come up Emmitsburg Road. 19th Indiana. Actually, there was only 6 companies on picket duty. The other 4 of the picket reserve. They fall in the column, and they're marching along. And eventually, the 6th Wisconsin is ahead of them. And, Rufus Dawes writes that he was going to have the band. He had the band getting ready to play. The Campbells were coming as they march into Gettysburg. When they start, hearing the booming of cannons off to the northwest, which would be John Buford's cavalry fighting, trying to hold back Heath's division. So they're approaching Gettysburg. Reynolds rides into town, meets with Buford, and we all know the scene in the movie. What goes, John? And Sam Elliott wipes his forehead with, that's the worst part, Sam Elliott acting I've ever seen. I can't imagine John Buford dabbing his forehead with, anyhow. So what happens is Reynolds rides back, and they turn the brigade off of Emmitsburg Road, right at the Cadore farm.
Where's that in perspective?
And that is south of Gettysburg. Actually, it is just to the west of the high water mark. It's the farm that's just to the west of the high water mark, Pickett's Charge. Okay. South of Gettysburg, a little bit southwest of Ziegler's Grove, due west of the clump of trees. We'll have to get all these familiar landmarks.
Yeah.
So they go cross lots to the whole brigade just because that's cutting the corner off to get to Seminary Ridge. Didn't drop their packs. They were in a hurry. Cutler's brigade is actually deployed first on the north side of Chambersburg Road. Then the Iron Brigade follows them. They advance, they advance up, actually down the western slope of Seminary Ridge into the swale, where one of the epic 19th Indiana stories takes place, because the color guard, which consisted of the color sergeant at the time was Burlington Cunningham, who had won the honor because he had saved the colors at Antietam when the original color bearer was shot. He had a color corporal next to him by the name of Abram Buckles, and they had the covers on the flags. When they were on march, they didn't carry them unfurled. They had what they called the shucks, Indiana farm boys, because they looked like a shuck of corn. And Burlington Cunningham cries out, "Abe, pull the shuck." And at the same time, there's a staff officer riding behind him, said, "No, don't stop, don't pull it," because what I think they wanted to do was surprise Archer's Confederates when they came up on the eastern side of McPherson's Ridge, when they popped up over them, okay? But they pulled the shuck and let the colors fly, and they came up the eastern face of McPherson's Ridge, took fire right away. Burlington Cunningham is wounded. He had the colors right away. But they push in rapid fashion. They will push Archer's Brigade back. The 24th Michigan, who at the time of attack was the furthest left regiment of the Armed Brigade, would actually outflank Archer's Brigade at Wilby's Run and then push them north, which a large portion of them were captured. Okay? Casualties for the 19th in this portion of the action were light. A few guys wounded. I don't even think anybody was actually killed. This happened so quick. Except for John Reynolds, who we know was killed, which he was, in my opinion, in a place he shouldn't have been, leading from the front. I will say this, I'm not a big Reynolds fan, and I'll just leave it there. So he gets killed, and but the Confederates are really given a bloody nose, and, Archer's Brigade is pushed back. Eventually, virtually kind of at the same time, the 6th Wisconsin, which was the reserve regiment of the Iron Brigade, is pushed to the north side of Chambersburg Road to counter a Confederate flanking attack. It's kind of funny because this whole action in the morning is sort of like the same. The Confederates are outflank Cutler on his right, and at the same time, Meredith, or Iron Brigade, outflanks Archer on their right. So, things tend to settle down. Action is basically they say Reynolds was killed about 10. It was really over probably in 90 minutes, that morning portion. Confederates pulled back, They got a bloody nose. Archer had a lot of guys captured. Of course, Davis's brigade had a lot of guys captured by the 6th Wisconsin and 84th New York, 14th Brooklyn, and the railroad cut. So now we have this law in the battle. And I think I should back up a little bit and tell you by this time, Gibbon is now in command of a division of the 2nd Corps. He got promoted after Antietam. The colonel of the 19th is Solomon Meredith, also known as Lincoln's Quaker General, or Long Saul, Saul was 6'7" tall. And Indiana politician, Wayne County, had walked with his family from North Carolina to Indiana. They were Quakers, and you'll find a lot of guys in the Iron Brigade or the 19th Indiana from North Carolina and Virginia. Really involved in Wayne County politics, like a sheriff, clerk of court, very close friend with Oliver Morton, the war governor of Indiana, who was a very close friend of Abraham Lincoln. So Saul, who is the original colonel of the 19th, at the Battle of South Mountain, is wounded when his horse falls on him. He goes to Washington City. And there he does what a politician does. He is campaigning for brigade command. Now, Meredith was everything Gibbon hated about a volunteer soldier, citizen soldier.
Yeah.
He's a politician, okay? His regiment, in Gibbon's eyes, was ill-disciplined. So, and at Antietam, the Lieutenant Colonel, Alois Bachman, is killed at the front of the regiment, leading the regiment across Hagerstown Pike. So now Gibbon has seen Meredith go to Washington. He's campaigning for brigade command, and the lieutenant colonel gets killed. And it's a deep subject. You really have to read the correspondence back and forth about how much Gibbon really did not like Saul Meredith as a soldier. Meredith ends up in command of the Iron Brigade.
Of course.
Because of his political connections. Yeah. And Lance Hurtigan, who is the historian, I call him the boss historian of the Iron Brigade, Boss Black Hat, and we talked about this, and history in a large degree has not been very kind to Saul Meredith. But Lance said, he was doing what he knew how to do to get ahead in politics. That's what he knew. So Saul's in command, okay? Leads him into the action at Gettysburg, is wounded there in the afternoon, wounded badly by a shell fragment. It should be noted, and then we'll go ahead with the 19th a little bit, that Meredith would never hold a field command. He's so badly wounded. His horse falls on him, concussion. His son Sam is one of his aides. Sam is wounded, what I believe, is at the very same time. Mm-hmm. Sam would come home to Cambridge City, Indiana, where he would die at the family home in January of 1864 of wounds received. He'd also been shot at Gainesville, too, of wounds received in the Civil War. Sam's other son, David Meredith, he had three sons, but his other son, David, was a major in the 17th U.S. Infantry. And he was brevetted for gallantry in action at Chickamauga. However, he had a severe alcohol problem. He stayed in the regular army.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers, exactly. But he would end up dying in, I think, 1867. And, they're buried in a family plot in Cambridge City, Indiana. So no matter what you think of Saul Meredith, maybe as a general, he did fight in 3 major battles of the war, and he also, his family's sacrifice to the old flag, I think, was supreme, losing 2 sons basically to the war. It's also interesting to note that when the Lincoln funeral train came through Cambridge City, Saul was actually on duty in Paducah, Kentucky. He's like the military governor down there. And the train paused in front of Saul's house. The tracks at the time were, like a half mile. Mm-hmm. So his family could pay respects to Abe Lincoln.
Wow.
So I think that's a pretty cool story.
That is cool.
And, The house is still there. We have some friends that own it. We got the Solomon Meredith statue restored a number of years ago. It's the tallest statue to a single individual in the state of Indiana.
Was he the tallest general during the war?
Yeah, I think he was.
6'7"'s insane.
Yeah, and his son was just as tall.
Like, no
Sam.
wonder he was he on horseback when he was wounded?
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Exactly. He was a big
too
dude,
easy.
man. So I'm kind of a Saul Meredith fan. There's a whole another little history. I mean, you know how people are just always digging for something, especially Gettysburg. You got to find a hook. There's a whole another thing about, when was Meredith wounded during the battle, and how did that affect how the brigade fought? Some people say it was in the morning. I say it was in the afternoon, because when they changed the alignment of the regiments shortly after in the morning, somebody, and it may have been Doubleday, but somebody moved the 19th to the far left flank and put the 24th Michigan inside the 19th regiment, and then I think it was the 7th and the 2nd Wisconsin at the time, or the other way around. But, why did they do that? The 24th Michigan, this was really their first action, and they will end up taking tremendous casualties in the Herbst Woodlot against the 26th North Carolina. But I think Saul knew that he wanted to put a trusted regiment on the left flank that was hanging in the air at the time. So he did. So we get to the afternoon. We get to 10 o'clock. There's a law on the battle. And the color guard, I'll need to back up real quick. When Burlington Cunningham went down in the initial fight, Abe Buckles, who was 16, 17, or 18, whichever account you read, he's a farm boy from Indiana, grabs the colors because Abe wanted to carry the national colors. And he went across Willoughby Run, and he was running so far to the west of the Confederate retreat, and that Colonel Dudley had to call him back. He said, "Come back, you damn fool, with that flag." So,
got a little ahead of himself
Abe
there.
he would be wounded again at Gettysburg. He would be wounded, and then he would he'd be wounded again at the Wilderness, where he won the Medal of Honor for carrying the colors. And then, I should say, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. No one wins it. And he would end up being a second lieutenant in the 20th Indiana, and then ended up on the West Coast as a judge. But so anyhow, so we have this law. Now the color guard so far has really taken very few casualties. We've pretty much identified about 12 of the members of the color guard, 10 of the 12. And of the 10 of the 12, 10 of the 12 will have been wounded or killed at Gettysburg. But it's the afternoon action that's the most intense. They go into a line of battle on the eastern side of Willoughby Run. It's a very poor position if you ever see their monument. It's low ground. There's high ground behind them, and Biddle's brigade is off to their left behind them, but they're also masked by McPherson's Ridge, and they're also very exposed to Confederate artillery fire from both Hare's Ridge and Oak Hill. So Biddle's brigade, sometimes they get in the Fairfield Road and they face north, and they get pulled back, and they go back and forth. But there's no way that they are attached to the left flank of the 19th Indiana. So we move on to about, we're in the afternoon. Sergeant Major Asa Blanchard, who is going to be the subject of the Trelawney painting we'll talk about later. He has led a detail. He's ordered to lead a detail to Willoughby Run, where they break up like 200, 300 Confederate muskets they've captured. I have yet to find the parts in Willoughby Run that broke up. And it's not for, I haven't looked. He was also, Colonel Dudley would write that he was also given a captured Confederate officer's sword from an officer of a Tennessee regiment by the name of Newton George, a colonel that they had captured that morning. Because as a sergeant major, Blanchard has to have a badge of his rank. And sergeant majors were usually not under arms. He'd be on the left flank almost as a guide of the regiment, so he would not be carrying a musket. So now he's got this officer's sword, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So anyhow, in the afternoon, about 3 o'clock, they start to see Heath's division is going to come forward again. Heath shortly will be wounded, and Pettigrew will end up being the divisional commander. Behind them, closely behind them in support, is Pender's division. And they easily outflank the position of the Iron Brigade, actually easily outflank even Biddle's. And the action there took place, probably lasted, Dudley said an hour, but probably lasted maybe top end 30 minutes. And they lost most of their killed and wounded. They had 27 killed at Gettysburg, and I figure at least 20 or 21 of those were killed in that action in that 30-minute time. It was said by one staff officer that the men felt like leaves before a storm down there on the bottom. So they're being pressed back. The color guard is falling rapidly. They're getting shot to hell. The January issue of Gettysburg Magazine has a really great detailed article that I worked with, written by John Priest, and we worked on this trying to get the actual, almost the impossible thing to do to try to get the actual flow. So the color guard is shot to hell. Abe Buckles goes down. Burlington Cunningham, who'd been shot in the morning, gets patched up. He had the flag. He goes down again. Colonel Dudley grabs the flag, and supposedly in the area of the 19th Monument today, it's been written, and he gets shot in the leg just right now. Sergeant Major Blanchard comes running over, takes the colors from him. I'm sorry, the colonel shouldn't have the colors. Sam Williams, who's the colonel of the 19th, yells at Blanchard to find some people to carry the colors. Mm-hmm. And at this time, the regiment is starting to fall back, falling back both to the due east and maybe folding a little bit to the northeast to take the cover of the edge of the McPherson woodlot, Herbst woodlot. So at this time, they're engaged strongly with the right flank of the 26th North Carolina. And you hear a lot about the 26th North Carolina and the 24th Michigan going head to head. They were both large regiments. The 26th North Carolina had more than 800 men in it.
Wow.
Yeah. And the 11th North Carolina that was on their right flank had like 600. Okay, so
still
now
pretty large regiments.
Now you're looking at
Yeah.
It's a numbers game right now. That's why the Iron Brigade was outflanked out of their position and pushed back, because it's a pure numbers game. I mean, at the time, I think the 24th Michigan before the battle had 400-ish, 450, and the 19th Indiana had 288. So,
wow.
Yeah, those are the two regiments. So they're going against two of the strongest regiments in the Army of Northern Virginia at the time. So they get pushed, they get flanked. The 19th gets flanked first, and they're falling back into the woods. And if you've been up on Meredith Avenue, if you come around the John Burns statue, you come back up, you go down a little bit, you go by the 26th North Carolina on your right, and you go down. The 19th is really down in a hole. Terrain has changed a lot because of the roads. Anyhow, you come kind of up a rise, so you're coming back up to the side of East McPherson's Ridge, and that's the way they're falling back. They said there was enough guys behind some trees, it's like a tail wagging the dog, because they were trying to stay behind each other. So they fall back. Interesting, Colonel Williams yells at some soldier and says, "Take the colors." And the guy says, "I'll be damned if I'm going to go to hell." Because the color bearers are all just getting shot. I mean, they're all coming down. And I think this guy who said that, was our friend William Roby Moore, who wrote the great diary. Because he says in his diary, the colonel ordered me to take the colors. I didn't want to, but I did. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's got the colors. He immediately gets shot. His finger gets shot off.
Oh, wow.
Holding on the staff of the colors. And he says it came from the left. Next to him is Sergeant Major Blanchard. And he has, at that time, what they said was the regimental color banner. And he's waving it. And William Roby Moore says, he was kind of a pompous guy. And he yelled at him, "We got to fall back." The rest of the regiment had fallen back and were actually firing over their heads, which if you walk the terrain, you can almost tell where these guys might have been.
Yeah.
So they fall back to the top of the ridge. More color bearers have gone down. Colonel Williams, Sam Williams, yells at two of the lieutenants to shuck the colors, to get them shucked, because whoever touches them and waves them is going to get shot. Yeah. They try to do it. They actually get it done. One of the lieutenants is wounded. The other one, Crockett East, is killed. So now a couple other guys, and this is where it gets jumbled up. They grab the colors. Blanchard has what we pretty sure was the national flag. He gets basically in the area of the 151st Pennsylvania Monument. Dudley would write later that he heard he was shot like 100 feet or so south where Reynolds was shot. But that's kind of a moving target, even though there's a Reynolds monument there.
Yeah.
So he ends up, he's got the colors. He is he's going to pull the shuck off of it. And he's going to let him fly. And he's shot in the leg. And as he falls, he's bleeding out. And as he falls, he says, tell mother I never faltered, and he dies. Okay. So the colors then, the regiment is in the process of pulling back. Williams sees the 151st Pennsylvania coming up, which was the only First Corps reserve unit that Doubleday had, coming up. It's a large regiment too. And Williams thought it was their relief, and so he starts pulling back the 19th. The 24th Michigan would eventually join them as they retreated across the swale, and they would take position at the slight barricade of rails on Seminary Ridge. So that ends the basic color guard episode. At barricade of rails, they didn't lose any more members of the color guard. So basically in the afternoon they were back at the barricade by 4 o'clock. So figure an hour, the whole action took place. They lost the bulk of their color guard and killed and wounded.
Wow.
Which Blanchard being the last one to, wave the flag before he was shot down. And they did get the colors off of the field back to the barricade. So
it was unshucked, reshucked, and then unshucked.
Started to be unshucked. Now, we can go on and we can talk about the fight of the barricade, which is one of my favorite subjects, which is unknown to a lot of people.
Well, let's go, Phil.
Okay,
we got time,
fine.
baby.
That's
let's
fine.
talk.
We got plenty of.
We
got plenty of Four Roses. That's fine.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
So maybe we should get a pizza. So,
quick question going back to just as I'm imagining this in my head, when you said there's a lull after the lull. Mm-hmm. They're brought back and reorganized, and they're shifted to the left. You said, of the brigade line.
Actually, they were the left in the morning's action when they flanked Archer's brigade out, and they actually, when they were pulled back on the eastern bank of Willoughby's Run, then the regiments were switched. Excuse me, the 24th Michigan was the left. Okay, the 19th was next. When they got back in position, they put the 24th more in the center.
Okay. And when they're attacked again, are they still in that middle area? It's not like they're initiating it. The Confederates are coming out. No. So they've got a hill behind them, a rise in front of them, or a hill in front. What's the term? I mean, what's the geographic feature on the battlefield?
McPherson's Ridge is behind. And that's a great question, because they had sent Meredith and Blanchard himself had been sent back to talk to Doubleday, who now had divisional command, and say, can we pull back to the ridge? This is a bad position.
Yeah.
And, Doubleday said no. Abner, who had his best day of the Civil War and then would get relieved that night, he got pulled in the late innings. I mean, I can see about Doubleday. So, he said no. We got, he was fixated on holding the position that he thought that Reynolds had picked. And that woodlot, he liked the Herbst woodlot because he thought that it controlled the approaches on Chambersburg Road, which is to the north, and even Fairfield, which is a little bit further to the south. So he said, no, we're going to hold this position. And supposedly Blanchard said, yes, General, if the Iron Brigade can't hold this position, where will you find men that can?
Yeah.
You never know if that, So, they wanted to get it's an awful position.
And that's where their monument is today, is in that
it's
spot.
Down, it's down the hole. And you can really see, even if, they figure the regimental line might have been 200 yardish long, but there's no flank markers because the state of Indiana never paid for flank markers. So, but at the same time, terrain has changed a little bit. They had the road to the Springs Hotel, which was an after-war feature on the western bank of Willoughby Run.
That messed with the terrain a little bit.
Yeah, it sure did. They put a road through there, and they ran a trolley, but
don't you hate that?
Yeah, I do. So but at the same time,
so they're pulled back to Seminary Ridge now.
Yeah, now they've fought. That's a fighting retreat. Okay, and now they Doubleday caused when the first Corps was coming up, the second division. I'm trying to make this right. Under the name of Robinson, built what they called a slight barricade of rails. You know the picture of the Confederate prisoners, the famous picture? Okay. If you look at that material there, we feel that was taken from the barricade of rails. It's taken very close to where the end of it. It was crescent-shaped, okay? And at the time, on the western face of Seminary Ridge, right in front of the seminary, okay, Seminary Ridge Museum now, it's our parking lot now, there was an open grove of trees. It wasn't, but it was like a picnic area, and they built the barricade kind of along the arc
of that woods.
Of the woods, and it extended just past the southern edge of where the seminary is, and it went back up a little bit to what they call the Crowth House, which is one of the three houses that were on Seminary Ridge time of the battle. So they fall back there. And it's a jumble of regiments. So, Biddle's brigade has been flanked at the same time on the left, and they have fallen back, and they're in the barricade, the 19th and 24th. 24th Michigan, Colonel Henry Morrow gets severely wounded there while he's holding the colors there in the barricade. And Colonel Williams would say, here we would make our last hopeless stand. And they were at the barricade maybe 15 or 20 minutes until the Confederates were able to flank that position and turn the left flank of that position. They actually came basically from the south of the seminary and outflanked the barricade. They never took it by direct assault, and mainly that was because of the effective artillery fire of Battery B, which was on the northern side of Chambersburg Road, and Stevens Battery, main battery of Napoleon guns that was on the south side, plus Wainwright had arranged like 16 guns there. So the artillery fire, particularly of the Napoleons, really helped them hold the barricade. Now, why is that important? Because, the old fight, who left the battlefield first, the 11th Corps, north of the town, or the 1st Corps? A lot of people, and I kind of agree, will say they both did. But at the same time, that time bought on Seminary Ridge at the barricade helped get a lot of troops through the streets of Gettysburg. There was still, a lot of chaos in the streets.
It was the final stand.
Yeah, exactly. It was a final stand. And a lot of the guys, remember, the Iron Brigade guys had all come up across lots. So they didn't know anything about the streets of Gettysburg. They had no idea where to go. The 19th kind of went Washington Street back across lots, but the 6th Wisconsin and some of the regiments, the 6th was still on the north side of Chambersburg Road. They kind of had to find their way through town. So, the fact that you could hold them back any length of time was a very crucial thing. And I think it really, I think the 11th Corps might have gave way first, but does it really matter? At the end of the day, the thing that matters is that the casualties inflicted by the Iron Brigade on Heath's division on July 1st, I feel are directly attributable to the Union victory. because they bled that division just completely dry, and they weren't much of a factor. Even though some of the 26th North Carolina would make the charge, Pickett's charge, where they would suffer more casualties, but combat effectiveness was just drained on the first.
That 26 that's the 26 that had that 800.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think their percentage of casualties was more than 80%.
Oh my
easily.
gosh!
Wow.
Yeah. So you look at the 11th North Carolina. I think they were in the top 3 or 4 of Confederate unit casualties too. But they were, it's hard to break out the first day in Pickett's charge casualties.
Right.
But,
But I mean, if they were working with their first day numbers on
yes.
Pickett's charge, who knows what would have happened? But if it wasn't, like you said, the 19th casualty that they caused.
And the Iron Brigade. And think of the other thing, too, the leadership casualties.
Yeah.
The loss of the 26th lost their colonel. The 11th North Carolina lost their colonel. Heath was wounded. Pettigrew, who I have heard was John Gibbon's first cousin, but some people say no, but I've heard that, so just that.
Pettigrew actually passed away after the battle, just up the road from us in Bunker Hill.
Yeah, he would be wounded at Falling Waters during the retreat.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And then he would be, and that used to be such a cool house and monument.
Oh, yeah.
And now you it's silhouetted against the townhouses.
Well, the monument's gone now because
They relocated it. It's in front of the drive of that
It used to be
house.
right on 11, right on the Valley Pike.
I remember. We used to, back in the day before,
Yeah.
the explosion. but no, it's so, when you look at the first day, I should have bought the better numbers, but I think at the first day's casualty alone easily ranks in the top 10 of Civil War battles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little known fact too, is that the Confederate, well, not a little known, but like for some of our listeners, they might not know, the Confederates really handled themselves day one.
Yeah.
They really, pushed the initiative and that kind of thing and really inflicted casualties starting out the battle.
Yeah.
And the 19th being victim of some of that walloping, I would say. But, I mean...
the Iron Brigade would never be the same after. They lost
Right.
the highest percentage of any brigade during the battle there. After the battle, they would start to be, Meredith is wounded. He would never return. There would be other regiments that weren't Western regiments put into the brigade. And, by the time in 1864, when they reorganized, the First Corps, late 1863 or 64, the First Corps would be folded into the Fifth Corps,
It just wasn't the same.
Yeah, no,
Kind of reconsolidating.
No. And the 11th Corps would end up, and the 12th Corps would be sent, down south. They'd be sent to Tennessee to become the 20th Corps. So, those first day regiments, and I'm an 11th Corps fan. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of Ohio regiments in the 11th Corps, and I think I took a Gettysburg tour guide by the name of Stuart Dempsey, who's just a fantastic guide. About 3 years ago on July 1st, it was just Stuart and I. I hired him. I said, I want to know about the 11th Corps. So I went soup to nuts. It was a hot day. It was the beginning of COVID. And so, we masked up and we started right there at the 11th Corps position in the morning. And we went all the way through the first day and the retreat and then East Cemetery Hills position and the fight of the 73rd and 55th Ohio actually fought on a ridge that is in a residential area now and suffered tremendous casualties on the skirmish line for 2 days that people don't even know about, And, Stuart and I were on the field for like 8 hours.
Wow.
I came back to the hotel and my wife Amy said, you kept that old man out there he's not older than I am, for 8 hours in this heat. And I said, yeah. Stuart said, you want to keep going? I said, yeah. Stuart's kind of interesting because he had 2 uncles, the 73rd Ohio, that were killed at Gettysburg out on the skirmish line.
Wow.
So it's very personal to this day.
Did you know that going into it?
No, he told me during the
So
tour. Yeah.
you tickled its fancy right away. Yeah.
You know, if you ever on Washington Street, you know where Tommy's Pizza is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
if you keep going on Washington Street, and the hospital's on your left.
Yep.
There is a house that looks like a twin to the Widow Thompson house.
Okay.
And it was a battle house, and right next to it is a gray house called the Strock House. And it has you have to slow down, and you'll make people upset because they want to go fast. But look at the battle damage on that house.
Yeah.
And if you go to the new Adams County Historical Society Museum, they've got a great picture of the Strock House taken right after the battle, showing all the battle damage against Confederate sharpshooters that were in place against the Federal position.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of people zoom right by it, painted gray.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool house to see. I mean,
Wow.
and you can about match up the repairs if you take the original and see where they.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's neat. Well, Phil, quickly take us through the second and the third. What does it include for the 19th?
By the time the barricade folds, the 19th falls back to East Cemetery Ridge, and they are put in position, basically in support of the 5th Maine Battery, Stevens Knoll, and it's kind of the lower slopes of Culp's Hill.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of facing northeast, so they would be able to help support with musket fire when the advance of in the night of the 2nd of Ewell and Early against Cemetery Hill.
Yeah.
But they didn't suffer. Maybe a couple guys wounded. They were just in position there. And then by the 3rd, they just stayed in the same position. You know, they could hear Pickett's charge. William Roby Moore had been captured in the meantime, and he got to observe Pickett's charge from a rooftop in town. And then they stayed in position till the 5th. They went back out. Someone went back out in the battlefield to help bury their dead. And it's amazing. I got an account, and of course, newspapers.com is great, but there is a correspondent. We don't know who he is, initials TTS. And he wrote that he had gone to the battlefield with an Indiana Aid Commission. And they showed up, and they buried, he said, we buried 17 or 18 of the 19th Indiana Regiment in a space of 50 feet in diameter. Okay? They were so decomposed, having lain for 7 days and nights, and it was really more like 4 or 5, it makes no difference, that it was impossible to handle them, and they were covered up just as they lay. The regiment went to battle with 315 men. It was really 288. It would take the detached guys out, and they brought out 88.
Wow.
So that was it, 210. 210 were wounded, killed, or captured. He said, our dead are all buried. And, so like I said, the 19th, they lost 27 men killed outright during the battle. And I figure 20, 21 easily were in that afternoon action, that quick afternoon action. They lost a couple at the barricade that we can, attribute to.
So how many of them got reinterred back home in Indiana? How many of them are reinterred in the Gettysburg National Cemetery?
I think there's, let me get off the top of my head, I think they've got 9 or 10 19th Indiana guys in the National Cemetery.
It's a good bit still.
A lot of unknown. Crockett East, who was only identified by his sergeant, even though he was lieutenant, he had not been mustered yet, so he hadn't gotten his, lieutenant bars, shoulder straps. He was identified only by his sergeant chevrons because they were so decomposed.
And this is days.
Yep. This is 5 days after the battle. And now we can segue to one of the more interesting stories, which gets us into the print.
Yeah.
But 1913 comes. Okay, we're at the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. And, of course, there's a lot of things starting to be written. And a hospital steward by the name of Henry Marsh writes this account of the color guard, thrilling account of the color guard. And it ends up with Asa Blanchard getting killed, right with what we discussed. And, however, at the end of it, it says that he was wrapped in the flag he so bravely borne and taken back to Richmond, Indiana, for burial. As we started researching this a number of years ago, I live not too far from Richmond, Western Ohio, so I'm thinking, okay, we'll go to Richmond and find his grave. And this was even before the find a grave stuff, and I couldn't find any record of him. And as we start digging and digging and digging, and my wife Amy is a great help when it comes to digging things out, we find out that his father lived in Washington, D.C., and he actually was taken back to Washington, D.C. for a funeral on like July 11th or 12th, and he's buried in Congressional Cemetery there. So the tail end of the story about the flag is fiction. It's not true. In 1888, Colonel Dudley writes a letter to the family. The family has this flag, and it's supposedly to be the Asa Blanchard flag. And it's supposed to be the flag that he was born in. And he writes this letter about the action of Blanchard, at the battle. And it's full of details and stuff, some of it that he had to hear because he was wounded off the field. But the Indiana, by this time, the flag is quite the relic. And it's in the museum. A guy, in 1913, he cleans it. He puts contrasting cloth behind it so you see all the bullet holes. It's full of bullet holes. I'll show you guys a picture later, but it's full of bullet holes. And it's touted as the relic, the 19th Indiana Regimental flag that was carried at Gettysburg. It wasn't. It's not the regulation silk flag. It's a cotton flag. It's got grommets on the fly. It doesn't have a sleeve. It's not the right dimensions. It's not the regimental flag, besides the fact that the late Howie Mattis, who was a tremendous flag historian, had already written, the issues of flags for the 19th Indiana. And they had gotten their newest regimental in the spring of 1863, our newest national color. Mm-hmm. So what is this flag that is now supposedly the 19th Indiana flag? I'm pretty sure that it is a flag, a company flag of Company B, which Blanchard belonged to. And I'm pretty sure that there's a letter or there's a newspaper article when the 19th returned to Indianapolis in January of 1864 that Dudley returned a flag to the women of Richmond, Indiana, that had been presented to the company when it mustered in 1861. That could be that flag, okay? What I am sure of, it's not the 19th Indiana flag. Did it cover, had it covered his casket in Washington? Maybe. Did the family have it and they used it there? Maybe. Timeline works out. That's July of 63. The regiment could have it. Dudley could have it back. Remember, Dudley was wounded in the hospital at the same time, so he was around. He could have it back, take it to Richmond, present it to the veterans. When they would have their reunion, every once in a while you'll see an account that we had the flag that, covered Blanchard's casket. That was our relic that we had, But it wasn't the flag that the regiment carried at Gettysburg. And there's a couple of accounts of guys who took the colors back to cemetery. They carried them back to Cemetery Ridge. They didn't leave it on the body there. Think about it. The body laid there for at least 4 days with a flag around it. You don't think a Confederate...
They wouldn't have left that.
Thank you. Exactly. Yeah. So that is one of the things we've been pretty much able to debunk. Stories. You sometimes have to watch veteran stories. William Roby Moore and Henry Marsh almost got in a fight at a reunion because Marsh made some statement that the fire was so intense from the cover of fire that Williams ordered them to drag the flag in the dust. Now, Marsh was a hospital steward who was back at the railroad station. That's where their aid station was in Gettysburg. He wasn't there. Mm-hmm. So as soon as he said that about dragging the flag in the dust at the reunion, pretty much all bets were off, okay? So what else might it be? Blanchard had a brother by the name of Lucian, and Lucian would die. Was in the Navy, and he was on Charleston Station, the blockade of Charleston, in the USS Alabama, and he would die 2 weeks after the Battle of Gettysburg of yellow fever. So think about this: the Blanchard family, who was originally from Vermont and had only lived in Richmond because of their father's job for a couple of years, and then his father moved right back to Washington, D.C., lost 2 sons in the month of July of 1863, Lucian and Asa. So that's the end of the color guard episode. Except, there's more. So if you ever see the Troyoni print, the black hats, that is the scene of Sergeant Major Blanchard pulling the shuck off the flag on East McPherson's Ridge. And how that came about, I've had people say, how did you get Don Troyoni to do a print?
How'd you do it, Phil?
I sent him an email one night.
It's as easy as that.
And he answered back, surprisingly. I didn't know him. I just had been researching this, and I thought it was a cool scene, and Blanchard, the flag, the shucks, the color. And he goes, this is like 2012, 11, 12. He said, cool, I think I'll do it.
Well, there we go.
What's
the title? Is it called Pull the Shuck?
The Black Hats.
Okay.
I liked, So then we start the whole research thing. Of course, you got to be on your research, and thanks to Lance Hertigan and my friend Jerry Coates and John Heiser of the National Battlefield Park at Gettysburg, we worked. It was a couple-year process because Don would have other projects going, and then he'd bounce back to you, and details such as, did they have their knapsacks on, or did they drop their knapsacks, or did they have in blanket rolls, knapsacks? What kind of shape the Hardy hats were in? Just
down to the last detail.
Oh, it's great.
That's cool for listeners to know that especially for Troyoni, that much detail goes into the research there.
He is. So I mentioned the Confederate sword that Blanchard was given by Dudley on the morning of July 1st after the Newton George. So I said, he's got this, Don, he's got this sword. We can show him, with a sword. Mm-hmm. He said, what kind of sword is it? I said, I don't know. He said, it's a Confederate officer. What? I said, I don't know. I can't, can we just make it like an 1850 foot officer sword?
Right.
So you'll see it, if you look at the print, I can show you a picture of it. You'll see, Blanchard's getting ready to pull the shuck, and he's got the scabbard of the sword, and laying behind him, you'll see the hilt of a kind of a foot officer's sword. So Don included. But no, it was amazing. We did a day of field work with him, just taking pictures of where we thought the scene took place.
This all happened, yeah.
And my son, at the time, Matthew, Matt was like 18, and he went with me, and our unit has a set of colors, that we had made. So Matt would be waving the flag, and Don took pictures of him waving the flag and putting the shuck on, taking the shuck off, and and then the afternoon came, and Don said, "Okay, see you later." And he was gone, and
Give me your thoughts the first time you kind of saw the finished product.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
Because, cool. I was, I'm not, one of those, published first-rate, scholar historian guys. I'm just a guy with a tremendous passion.
Yeah.
And love to research and love the story. And the fact to have Don Troyoni put this together, and I can't thank my dear friends, Jerry Coates, but especially Lance Hertigan. I've known Lance for a long time. I had mentioned Amy's dad, John Roby. He and Lance have shot together in the NSSA since 1961 or 2.
Wow.
Lance was always with the 6th Wisconsin. And, there is not a nicer guy to meet and talk to and work with that he's just an amazing man. if you go to the Kenosha Civil War Museum, he had a big hand in that, and you can see the flavor of the Iron Brigade in that museum.
That's cool.
But at the end of phone calls and conversations, he would say a lot, we have a lot of fun, don't we? And the answer is, yeah, we have a lot of fun doing this.
For sure.
We really do. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's cool. He's a cool guy. Yeah.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming on. I know we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
great time,
sipping
as always.
Four Roses. Is there anything you want to pitch? Any groups you want people to look into, visit?
I got to talk about the North-South Skirmish Association, because if
By
it
all
wasn't for
means.
them, I wouldn't be here. So you can find our website at nssa.org or .net. Actually, the real quick and dirty about the NSSA is a lot of people don't know it started in 1950, and all reenacting and living history has come from the NSSA, because at the Centennial they were the only organized Civil War group, and then after the Centennial, the Brigade of the American Revolution, a lot of those people were NSSA members, and then your reenacting people, they would break off from the NSSA and the live fire, and the living historians today.
That's cool that it all comes from that.
You think about 1950, and it started with two guys, Ernest Peterkin, who was a renowned Marine archaeologist, and Jack Rawls, who was a Confederate. They got together writing back and forth, challenging shooting match with Yankees and Rebels using, at that time, obviously original Civil War rifle muskets. So they started in 1950, and it grew. And in the early 60s, we bought the range at Fort Shenandoah, which is north and west of Winchester off 522. We have 2 nationals a year in May and October, and we have other regions too. Like I live in Ohio, we have a Midwest region. So if anyone wants to learn more, they can hit our website and take a look at the video there and see if they want to learn more. So yeah.
Well, perfect.
Sure.
Well, you heard it here, and we appreciate you guys listening, and hopefully you learned a little bit more about the 19th Indiana at Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great episode. Glad to
We'll
have
see.
everybody.
We'll see when the numbers come in.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
You gotta
doubt.
see the ratings. The phones start ringing afterwards. We'll see how good the episode was.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Phil,
too,
for
guys.
coming
Appreciate
on.
what
Thank
you're
you.
doing too.
Yeah.
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 We'll catch you on the next one. See you guys.